And I just like feel like there's a lot of synchronicities between me and Emily Henry. Again, this is why if I meet Emily Henry in real life, she's gonna think I'm crazy and she's gonna be like, please do not leave me alone in a room with this girlie. Hi, my name is Nichelle, and this is my favorite books of 2024. It is New Year's Day. I like refuse to film this video before January because who knows what my favorite book of the year is going to be. Like, I could have read it in the past week. I didn't finish any books in the last week, but like I could have. And that's the important thing. But here are my favorite books of 2024. I have a top 10 and they will be ranked in order. But I also have 2 honorable mentions that I'm going to talk about first because I wanted to talk about them. And so I'm going to. In my honorable mentions category, we have Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. This is the second Catherine Center I've read. I read The Bodyguard last year when everyone else was reading The Bodyguard. Or maybe even this year. I can't remember, but I liked Hello Stranger even better. This is the story of this young woman who's a portrait artist and she gets like face blindness. Premise is like fun. I felt like it was just like a really fun, delightful little rom-com, and I loved it. And I wanted to talk about it. It didn't make it quite to my favorites, but like truly delightful. Catherine Center also does like closed door romances. If you prefer a less spicy book, Hello Stranger, Catherine Center in general is the way to go with this. I'm excited to read more Catherine Center in the new year. My other honorable mention that like barely didn't make the list is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I actually could have put a couple Ali Hazelwoods in this honorable mention category. I read 3 Ali Hazelwoods this year and enjoyed all of them. I think there's just like something about her rom-coms and something about the way she writes these romances that just like brings a smile to my face. Bride is her first paranormal romance, and I, as a Twilight girl in my core, in my being, I'm always going to love a vampire story. Our main girlie is a vampire named Misery, and she winds up being like married off to like the king of the werewolves, essentially. I don't know if he's the king, but like someone who's like high up in the werewolf government, because they do this to like essentially create an alliance between the werewolves and the vampires. Is something that happens again and again, but Misery has like a ulterior motive. She is like trying to solve like a little mystery that she thinks the werewolves might be connected to. I love this book so much. I thought it was so fun. I'm so excited. It's a series, and I'm excited to jump back into this world. I think it's a great entry point if you are normally a contemporary fiction reader and want something like a little more magical. Although I will say there is like a little bit of weird people. Some people were like very off-put by some of the weird spice stuff that happens in this book, because there is something specific to werewolves that happens in this book without going into too much detail. I don't know. It didn't bother me. But I love Ali Hazelwood. I'm so excited to read what she has coming out next. On to my top 10. In 10th place is a book I read in January. And I don't know if I really talked about it much. It was supposed to go in my reading booktuber favorites, but I never finished that video. It was abandoned. And so it never wound up there. But that's why I read this book. Otherwise, I would have never picked it up. And I'm so glad I did. It was such a delightful little book. It's like pretty short. I think it's like less than 200 pages. And the book is The Hero of This Book by Elizabeth McCracken. And this book is like classified as like auto fiction. It like exists in the space between like fiction and memoir. And I think the author like really very much plays with that line. You'll see a theme here that a lot of the nonfiction, I think maybe all of the nonfiction that I'm going to reference in my top 10 have something to do with writing. I like really enjoy like memoir style, essay style books by writers about like their relationship with writing. We'll talk about it more in those books that are heavier. But this book definitely talks about the relationship between the author and the reader, and the author and like truth, and what does it mean to write fiction that is also like very truthful. And it also delves deeply into grief. It is the story that follows this woman who's on a trip to London shortly after her mother's passing. And it's just like her time like walking around London, living a day, reflecting back over the course of her life and her journey with her mother. And it was such a beautiful book about like grief and about writing and about, like I said, truth and fiction and what all of that means. I just loved it so much. It was like just stunning little book. In 9th place, we have The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt. This book was written by my friend Chelsea Iverson, so I'm a little biased, but I think this book is such a delightful read, and I think it is something that could have a lot of interest to a lot of people. It's a historical fantasy, but the fantasy element is like fairly lightly intertwined. Like it's not like it's in a historical fantasy world, but just like there's some magic sprinkled in. And at some point she like described it as like a cottage-core Gothic, and I think that's the perfect way to describe it because it is like very garden centric. We're in Victorian England. There's like a lot of like parties and like weddings and romance, but also we deal with some like very dark themes. It is about our main character Harriet kind of grappling with the ways in which she has power, not only like her magic powers that she has connected to her garden, but also the way that she has interacts with power from the men in her life. The men in her life in general are not great guys, and again she's put in these positions where she like doesn't have the agency to escape, and she has to figure out how to wield what power and agency she does have to like keep herself safe in these situations. I thought it was so beautifully done. Harriet is such a lovely character. I loved the exploration of female friendship within the story as well, and just like super delightful. Next up, we have another, well, I guess this is technically our first like true nonfiction piece, and this is actually the last book I finished in 2024, although it was before Christmas, and that is The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This book is also pretty short. I think it's around, I listened to the audiobook and did the ebook. I like tandem read it. So I'm not exactly sure the length, but I think the audiobook was only like 6 or 7 hours. Like it was pretty short. It is very much like first person like essays about like 3 different situations that all kind of like bleed into each other, and he writes it in the form of a letter to his writing students. And I think largely it is about his relationship to writing, and again his relationship to truth within that writing, and his obligation as someone who writes, particularly nonfiction, but just like writes in general. So it starts, I can't remember exactly the order. I think it starts with him going to South Carolina to help a teacher in South Carolina who is fighting a book ban on one of his other books, and kind of explores the world of book banning and also like the South in America and what that looks like. And then he also takes a trip to Senegal in Africa, and he reflects on kind of the being in Africa as like an African American who is like whose ancestors were brought to America through the transatlantic slave trade, and what that looks like, and kind of his imaginings of what Africa would mean to him as like a Black man in America, and like the realities of what Africa is like, and the people in Senegal and their relationship to African Americans, and like what that looks like. And then the final section, and I think why this book is getting like a lot of conversation, is on Palestine. So it's like mostly a reflection on the conditions in Palestine, just like in general. He's like viewing it through his own personal lens, which is a lens obviously of being a Black man in America, and the stories and experiences of like segregation and racism he faces, and how he sees those playing out also in Israel and Palestine. The narrative he understood of what was like happening in Israel and Palestine is not the full story, and kind of really interrogates the way we tell stories about these places, and the way in which we understand like good guys and bad guys in situations, and how victims can also be the victimizer. And I thought it was really beautiful. I just like loved his reflections on his relationship to writing, why he does this work, and also just like all the places he explored. Another nonfiction book in my stack. I'm like surprised that there's so many. I guess there's 2 nonfictions and 1 autofiction in my list of favorite books. But my next book that I loved this year was And What Else by Daniel Handler. Daniel Handler is the man behind Lemony Snicket, who is the author of the series of Unfortunate Events, which was one of my favorite books. My book series as a child, I absolutely loved it, and have kind of like continued to really enjoy it. I mean, not that I revisit it frequently, but like loved the TV show when it came out. I recently reread the first one, and it was great. And it is Daniel Handler's kind of reflections on his relationship to books and to writing. He talks a lot about like being a child who loved stories, and like what that looked like and what that gave him in his life. And then he talks about his publishing and his writing career as well. And I think that it does like a really beautiful job of kind of weaving a story while keeping that as like the central thread. So it's definitely like a memoir told in these collection of essays, and I just really loved it. Daniel Handler has such a vivid like voice. If you have read the series of Unfortunate Events, I think you know that like you can just like, he is the narrator of this story in a really real way. He's not Lemony Snicket, but like you can tell that he wrote him, and I really just loved the construction of the story and also his reflections on writing. The next one is a shorty, but I wanted to include it because it is so good, and it's something that's on Kindle Unlimited. I think that's the only place you can actually get it. It is a short story novella. I think it's a short story by Alex E. Harrow called The Six Deaths of the Saint. And I don't want to give you too much. And that's like annoying because people kept putting this on their favorites videos. And I kept being like, okay, they're not telling me anything about it. How am I to know if I'm going to like it? But it's like a short, like I think it took me less than an hour to read the whole thing. I'm almost positive it did. It's been a while. And the way, like, Alex E. Harrow just does like such a fantastic job of like twisting everything we know about the story in this way that makes it so emotionally impactful. It is about a medieval knight, but like not really. Like if you're not into medieval knights, you still might like it. And if you're very into medieval knights, you might not like it. I think it's really great. I think it's worth almost everyone's time because I think it is really fun and interesting. And I can't tell you more. Okay. Next up, we have a funny story by Emily Henry. This is Emily Henry's latest release, and you could almost always count on Emily Henry to be in my favorite books of the year video. I absolutely adore Emily Henry. Like, I probably, if I like were to list out the like celebrities I have parasocial relationships with, Emily Henry would be like maybe number 2 or 3. You know, like Taylor Swift number 1, Emily Henry number 2, Phoebe Bridgers number 3. When I say that, it's not that I like love these people more than any other celebrity. It's that I have like a weird like sense in my soul, my being, that like we would be friends. We would be friends, Emily and I. And sometimes I think I'm a little too public about that. Sometimes I'm like, Emily, I'm gonna have an opportunity to meet Emily at some point in my life, maybe. We're authors, maybe one day we'll bump into each other at some conference, and she will like vaguely know of me on the internet because I'm so obsessed with her. And she'll be like, stay away from this girl, she's stalking me, you know? So I'm a little worried about that. Regardless, a funny story, her latest release is, I heard her describe it in an interview as like the other side of the Hallmark movie story. And so we're following this girl whose name I can't remember. I'm sorry. Normally I'm really good at remembering the Emily Henry characters, but I cannot remember her. We're following this girl whose fiance leaves her like a few weeks before her wedding, and she has uprooted her entire life to move to like his hometown. She has a job in this town. They had bought a house. Well, he had bought a house that they were living in together. So now she doesn't have anywhere to live in this town where she like knows no one but her fiance, and she like has to stay here because she has a job. And so she's like job hunting, looking for other spots. But meanwhile, she needs somewhere to live. And she winds up moving in with the roommate of the girl that her fiance left her for. Okay, because he obviously has an opening because his roommate now is living with her fiance. Kind of confusing. And then they strike up a romance, and it's just like really sweet. I really love the Emily Henry like emotional gut punch that she loves to pack in there. This one is about like flaky parents. She's giving, if I had to compare her to another Emily Henry heroine, I would say she's the closest to Miss Poppy from The People We Meet on Vacation. Like, they're close to each other. I just loved it. I thought it was so fun. I thought it was so sweet. Emily Henry can do no wrong. I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm over the moon excited for her new book, which is called like A Great Big Beautiful Life or something like that. That one sounds fantastic. It takes place on an island, which like, hello, I love an island. You don't know why I said that. Okay, this is a top secret. I'm excited that it takes place on an island because I'm currently writing a book that takes place on an island. And I've been writing this book for a while, so I like did not steal the idea from Emily Henry, but my book takes place on an island, and my book has a mysterious wealthy heiress. My mysterious wealthy heiress is in the past. She died. Well, we don't know what happened to her. She disappeared. She's dead though, because she would be like 150 at this point. So we know she is at this point passed away. I can't tell you too many details because this book doesn't have a buyer. This book is just a book I'm going to write and then I'm going to have to try to sell. So like this book shan't see shelves for years if it ever does. But I was excited to hear that she was writing an island book because I'm writing an island book. And if you're a newsletter subscriber, which you should be if you're not, subscribe below. I have talked about how sometimes I feel like, okay, this is crazy. This is crazy and I'm mostly joking, okay? Don't take this too seriously. But I like feel like there's a lot of like little moments in which Emily Henry things like really align like well with my life, in which I'm like, Emily, did you do that just for me? I don't mean that in a real way. I mean that in a way that I'm paying a lot of attention to Emily Henry and so things pop up. But like funny story by Emily Henry, there's an event, this is not a spoiler, but there's an event that the whole thing centers around, and it's a countdown to that event. It's like 300 days until event. And we don't know what like the date of the event because it's just like a countdown, and like I don't know how many days are between like March 15th and like June 11th or whatever. The book is counting down to August 17th, which is my birthday. Okay, what if everything is not about me? But what if it is? But what if it is? Also, it's in Maine, which her last book, which I had already started this book. This book has been in the works for a while. I had already started this book. This book also takes place, my book that I'm writing takes place in Maine, which is where Happy Place took place. An island off the coast of Maine. And I just like feel like there's a lot of synchronicities between me and Emily Henry. Again, this is why if I meet Emily Henry in real life, she's going to think I'm crazy and she's going to be like, please do not leave me alone in a room with this girlie. But it's a risk I'm willing to run because I have to tell you about these synchronicities. Number 4 on this list, we're getting towards the top, is Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. This is the most recent in the Magnolia Parks universe books by Jessa Hastings. It is the final book that we're getting from Magnolia's perspective, and I thought this book was so stunning. If you haven't read the Magnolia Parks series, then this book will like truly mean nothing to you. I like hate to put like a book in a series this high up, but like truly I loved this book so much. It is a lot slower and a lot just like more introspective, I think, than the other books in the series. Like there's less happening externally. It is mostly a book about grief, and it was just like stunningly done. I thought Jessa did a really beautiful job. I thought the conclusions that all these characters came to were done so beautifully and were so well deserved, and I just like loved it. I loved it so much. I'm so fascinated by Jessa Hastings. Hope you love some rambles. I'm going to chat with you. Jessa Hastings is such a fascinating author to me because she writes unlike anyone else that I've ever read. Like if you read a lot of books, you will start to notice like there's cadences, especially within like certain time periods. If you read a book from now, it will read differently than a book that was written in the year 2000, 1990. Not just like the cultural references, but just like the stylistic choices of the writing itself. Those like evolve as time passes. And Jessa writes in this way that like feels very modern. Like the book is set very much in the now, but it is not written like any other like contemporary fiction books that I've ever read. It does not follow like a standard plot structure. Like it doesn't have that same, again, if you've read a lot of books, even if you're not like super comfortable and familiar with like the beats of a story, you know the rhythm of a story. You know that like, okay, especially like a romance has like a pretty classic rhythm, and she does not write to that, which is more of a like typically a pennant of like a literary fiction. Literary fiction tends to be like plotless in this way, where we're not following like a standard story arc. And I wouldn't go as far as to say Magnolia isn't plotless, but the plot is like a lot less defined. We get a lot more like this than like one smooth arc. And I think it's because I've, again, listened to so many interviews with Jessa Hastings. She doesn't really read a lot of fiction, like barely any fiction. She reads like a bit of nonfiction, but she's like not a reader. Typically the advice that I like would give, and the advice that I think is like really apt to me as a writer, is like, in order to write good stories, you need to read a lot of stories. And like, I think that makes sense, and that's the only reason I'm able to write things. But that's clearly not the case for Jessa, and I'm just really fascinated by her. She has a standalone coming out next year that I'm really excited to read. I'm excited to see that. I just am like fascinated by her as a writer. I think she's really interesting, and I think she's doing something like quite unique. Anyway, Magnolia Parks Into the Dark was one of my favorites. It ripped me open. I cried so much in it. It is one of those books. I'm doing a Magnolia Parks recap series slowly on my YouTube channel, where I'm going through everything that happens in all of the books. And I don't know, I started the series before I read Into the Dark, and I don't know if I'll be able to recap Into the Dark because it is just so like soft and emotional. I think I would cry too much, and also not much happens. Like it's mostly just like grief journeys and like reckonings for a whole book, and I just don't know if I could do it. Top 3, my third favorite book of 2024 was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This book was like a National Book Award winner. Obama was like, oh, read this book. And I was like, oh, this sounds terrible. It didn't sound appealing to me, because the premise I had always been told is it's like a dystopian novel that follows this like traveling Shakespeare troupe. And I was like, unfortunately, I'm not a Shakespeare girly. I wish I was a Shakespeare girly, but I'm just not. And maybe one day I will be. I just like not. I've read Macbeth, I've read Othello, I've read Romeo and Juliet, I've read Much Ado About Nothing, and I think that's it. And so like that didn't sound great to me, But that's just like such a small portion of the book. I think this book is a really interesting blend of like literary, dystopian, and I would even say thriller at some points. It is incredibly readable while having those like heavier literary themes. I think the ability of Emily St. John Mandel to blend those things together so seamlessly is clear. It is the story of like a virus that wipes out 95% of the population, I think. This was written before COVID. But it's not linear. So we're following some people in the like days leading up to like the first viral outbreaks when they're realizing this is a true pandemic, and then we're following people like decades later, and that's when the traveling Shakespeare troupe comes in, and it is really a story about like what is the point of survival, and like what is the most, like, if we're surviving, why. Like, art makes survival worth living, and community and friendship make survival worth living. And it's also about kind of how small the world is. There are all these like connections, and we're following like a lot of characters, and to see the ways their stories like interlap and weave together, it's just so incredibly beautiful. It's so incredibly well done. It's just like a stunningly crafted book. I was blown away when I read it, and was like so glad to have read it. But it wasn't just like beautiful, it was also like thrilling. There's like a cult situation that was like stressful and like kept me turning pages. And the blend of those two things, where I was like, could not put it down because I was like, needed to know what happened next, but also was like, wow, what a beautiful gift it is to be human, was stunning. And I like don't know if I've ever read something else that has done such a great job of blending those two things together. Second place, and the book that I thought was going to be my favorite book of the year for the majority of my year, because I read this back in January, was The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This is a gorgeous, lush, like fantasy. It's hard to say for sure if it's fantasy, because a lot of what like the magic that happens in the story, you're not sure if it's actually fantasy, like if it's really magic that is happening, or if these girlies are just being weirdos. You know, it's hard to tell what's magic and what's just weirdo. But it's written in this gorgeously like gothic, lush fairy tale style. We're following kind of two timelines. We're following these two teenage girls who were close friends, one of whom is like very wealthy and lives in this gorgeous like manor home, and the other one who has like a more troubled home life, and they become like best friends, and they create this like magical world for themselves in her garden, but just like kind of in the world in general, in which they are living in kind of their own world. They're being a little bit weird in a really gorgeous little way. And then we're also following present day as this adult woman is coming back to this manor house, and she's married. We're following her husband, like watching all of this unfold and kind of learning more about his wife and her participation in like whatever was happening out there. And it is just like lush and gorgeous and dark and creepy. And it's like my favorite, I don't know if you call it a genre, but like my favorite favorite type of books are books that are like creepy but pretty. Like, I don't like gross, really. Like, I'll read it, but like gross is not something that is going to make me go, ooh, I want to read that. But you told me it's like creepy pretty. I'm all about it. Creepy pretty is my favorite. House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland is another favorite that like has a similar like spooky, creepy, naturey vibe. Love this book so much. So gorgeous. Yeah. Then my favorite book of the year is Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano. Again, I'm not the first person to discover this book. I think this was Barnes & Noble's book of the year last year. It was like Oprah's 100th book club pick. This book people loved, and I loved it too. Add my name to the list of people who love this book, because this book was just absolutely stunning. I loved it so quickly. I thought it was so beautiful. It is the story of these four sisters growing up in Chicago. It starts when they're like I think the oldest is like maybe 20, and the youngest is like 16. And it follows them over the course of like the next several decades of their life. And we were following them mostly from the perspective of this man who starts dating the oldest sister at the beginning of the book. And he is a basketball boy. So at its core, this is a sports romance. But it is gorgeous. It just follows the relationship between these sisters, and they're incredibly close to each other. And it's about their family dynamics, about their relationship with their parents and their relationship with their community. And they're all quite different, and they have like different challenges and struggles they face over the course of their life. But it really is about their sisterhood, and it just like, it's beautiful. It is so sad at the end. I like heard people be like, this book wrecked me. And then I was like, what are you guys talking about? Because it's not sad all the way through. There's just like something that happens that is quite sad. And it really like tints Tin's the book. It is like sometimes people will call it a Little Women retelling. It's not. It's like referential to Little Women in the sense that it's four sisters, and like they even talk about like being four sisters. They obviously compare themselves to Little Women. And there are like quite a few references to Little Women throughout, but it like isn't following the same like story plot structure as Little Women. I just thought it was so beautiful. It was the book, the kind of book that when I was thinking about it the next day, which I was thinking about it the next day, I was crying in my car. It's sad, but it's not like sad for the sake of sad. It is sad for the sake of like thinking about love. I think I love and appreciate it. It's like actually it's like quite important to me that books that like deal deeply with like love and grief like balance those two. Sometimes I find books, I've talked about this in my Throne of Glass recap if you've watched those, I like find it to be like a little lifeless and a little devaluing of love when we like remove the possibility of grief from it. In Throne of Glass, I like talk about it with like life bonds where they're Sarah J. Maas loves when people bond their lives together so they have to die at the same time, and immortality. And I think a lot of times in fantasy romance we do like remove that aspect of grief because it seems like the hard part, but like I think there's something like really intensely beautiful and important about having grief in books to like paint the fullest picture of what love looks like, because love does not only look like those moments of profound joy, which like Hello Beautiful explores so beautifully, but also those moments of like profound loss, and also like the joy that can be found within that loss, and like how that can create opportunities for like new moments of joy. It was just like absolutely stunning. It was gorgeous. It is a book I know I'm going to come back to again and again. One of my favorite books I've ever read, would like definitely make the list of like all-time favorites. Those are my favorites from the year. It was not a great reading year overall. I only read 64 books, which for me is like quite low. I do find I'm doing the best. I'm the happiest when I'm reading about 2 books a week minimum, which gets you to about 100 a year. But there have been years where I've read 150. I like always feel a little weird because I think there's a lot of like discourse online about like how many books is too many books, how many books is not enough books, all those things. And mostly I don't care. I don't care how many books you're reading. I don't care what you think about how many books I'm reading. I'm not someone who wants to be like, I want to read less books next year and absorb them better. No. In my ideal world, I would read every book that ever was written. Or at least give it a shot. Maybe I'd DNF some. But like, I would like to read all the books. I don't feel like because I'm reading more, I'm giving less of myself to those books. You know, it's not something I'm interested in. So I'm interested in reading 100 books minimum this year. Like really, my secret goal is 150. But like 100, if I don't read 100 books this year, I'm going to be a little disappointed in myself. Okay, that is all I have for you for this favorites books of 2024 video. I can't wait to be reading books again in 2025. Let me know what your favorite book of 2025 was. Or you don't know yet. You don't know yet. Which just started. Let me know what your favorite book of 2024 was. I like really do want to know. January tends to be a really good reading month for me because I'm reading everyone else's favorites. So if you had a favorite book or a book that you think based on my favorites that would be my favorite, let me know. Obviously, you have a duty. You have a duty to let people know when they have a book that they could love and read. Anyway, I will see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.